Welcome back to the Minuteman Initiative. We've got a good topic for today. So we're going to be talking about reconnaissance basics. Now, this is a part one to a multi-part series. The reconnaissance mission as a whole is very vast. There's a lot of detail to it. But today we're just going to be kind of scratching at the surface, breaking down the basics and kind of introducing our audience to the idea of reconnaissance and how you can use it as a citizen and from kind of a personal readiness point of view. So hope you enjoyed the episode, and let's get started.
All right, we're back. We just got done with our trauma medical training this last weekend, which it went fantastic.
They're so fun to do. I love doing them. I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's something that we're so passionate about, so it's fun to like completely shift into that focus.
And it's like, yeah, it's so outside the firearms realm, like for instruction, but it's still like right up. I would say it's as fun as teaching firearms classes. And it's a little bit more laid back, you're not on the range, you're not dealing with, you just don't know what you're dealing with from the firearms aspect. Where you're with trauma medical, you don't really know either, but you don't have as much like...
Well, I feel like administratively it's way more relaxed for us. Like,
yeah.
You're not as worried about stuff, like your biggest worry, which I would argue is also your biggest worry for firearms classes and stuff. But your biggest worry is like people understanding everything appropriately, making sure that you're delivering the information in an appropriate manner, in a manner that people can really digest it and understand it. So, which you are for firearms classes too, but then you have the whole safety element of like, because I mean, when you're teaching firearms classes, like you get a menagerie of people.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, the experience varies.
Yeah, you get guys that you're like, all right, you can tell in the first like few minutes, you're like, all right, this guy's gonna be, I can rely on this guy to do the right thing, and then you're gonna have those people that you're like, okay, we're gonna have to dedicate a full-time line coach to this because this dude is trying to reholster his gun with his finger on the trigger constantly or whatever,
Yeah.
You got to do a little bit of that safety, worrisome dance. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain, but
yeah, we've been to plenty of classes where we've like gone to, we got a pretty solid group of guys that we basically deploy whenever we're running bigger classes and stuff like that. But, we've done classes where we've legitimately been like, we've had like a little group huddle after like watching the first like string of fire, and it's like, all right, we'll just use Andrew, because I think it was Andrew last time that we used.
Andrew and Colton are like our two like, this is your guy for today. And they're just like, okay,
and they already know what that means.
Yep,
which is fantastic.
Usually they're already
so if
ready
you take a firearms class from us and Andrew and Colton are right behind you, just know you're the one. No. No, that's not always the case.
You've been blessed. You've been blessed with a little more safety oversight. Oh man. No, they usually know. Like that's the funny thing is usually like Colton will come up and be like, I think I'm gonna stand right behind this guy today. And we're like, yeah.
Yep.
You are.
Speaking of Colton, did you text him?
No.
Okay. We don't need him barging on in here. Our podcast studio, as you guys could tell from the last podcast, is not the most soundproof because, dogs.
Yeah, dogs indeed. But that's okay. We started nice and early this morning. And speaking of, I don't know what we're speaking of, but getting into it, we're going to talk about reconnaissance is what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
I was trying to segue naturally out of that, but it just didn't happen. So we're just going to do the hard segue.
Hard segues are good.
The hard cut, the hard editing cut. But yeah, so Today we're going to be talking about reconnaissance and just basics. We're going to start with the basics, right?
Yeah, we're going to kind of talk about why it would be important for the average civilian to work on the skills as far as just reconnaissance, whether that's, it can be passive or it can be like very intentional, reconnaissance. But we're going to kind of get into why you would want to do it and the importance of it, and then also kind of like some methods, some very basic methods of how you want to do it, kind of break down some gear maybe, and talk about I guess just all the different reasons why you'd want to be able to do it.
Yeah, and like big picture here, excuse me, big picture here, from that like Minuteman, guerrilla warfare or kind of like readiness perspective of coordinating with a community and, setting up efforts to better defend your community and your family and stuff like that. Where does reconnaissance fall in? Well, we both think it's super important because, a lot of people get so tunneled in on defense of their like home and family and community, from inside the home. And that's more of like an analogy, like, maybe not necessarily literally inside the home, but that could be the case for some people. Like some people literally are like, well, my decision for defense starts at the threshold, and when you're talking about like literally having to potentially shoot someone because they're, threatening you and your family, that might be the case. But really, defense of your community is way more proactive than that. I think it involves, especially in a more, I don't know if wartime is the right word for it, but a more like hostile environment,
Yeah, I mean, and it could be hostile, or it could even be, like a disaster relief. You can do reconnaissance for that sort of stuff too. I think it all applies. I think it applies to not only like invasion or potential like kind of shutdown of the government, or even which that seems pretty outlandish, but you should always be prepared for anything. And then also, disaster relief, having efforts for that, because that can happen at any time. I mean, there's no control over that,
Yeah. You can also use reconnaissance to like help coordinate and plan like what you would do. Because a lot of these techniques we're going to talk about today, give you a lot of information on your surrounding areas. If done correctly, will give you a lot of information on your surrounding areas, and it might be things that you haven't already, passively picked up just living in the area that you live in.
Yeah.
So, and I think really, if used correctly, this should push you outside of your comfort zones and kind of into more of your surrounding communities, which I think could be awesome. Have an idea of what's out there, how things could go, always kind of thinking like broad, like we talked about in the last episode when we talked a little bit about coordination and stuff, which coordination in this topic is massive. Like this takes coordinated effort to do.
Yeah, and this takes not only just coordinated effort with, it ultimately from the small level all the way to the, grand scheme, if you're not going to be able, reconnaissance isn't going to do much for you in like, if it's just you, it can, but it's going to be very limited because you're just basically gathering information for yourself and yourself alone. But if you have a group of people, then it's like, okay, we're gathering information for a larger, whether that's your family or a family, friends combo, or an entire community, even if you were able to like everyone kind of stand together,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really where it shines, is for that community, for that coordinated community effort. Where you're like, okay, if it came down to, for lack of a better phrase, every community for itself, that's where it's really going to come in handy. Because like the biggest thing that I always look at, it's like one of the biggest possibilities in my mind is supply chain cutoff for where we live.
Oh, yeah.
We live up in Alaska, and we're on the Kenai Peninsula, very isolated. Thankfully, we have a lot of natural resources up here. We have, wild game, and there's agriculture actually does pretty well here, and some things do. But it would still hurt. It would hurt our community a bunch to have the supply chain cut off.
Yeah, because it would be kind of baptism by fire, because it would go from, there's people that go to buy like grown vegetables and stuff from around here, and they try to make that a habit of what they do, but they can always fall back if for whatever reason you have a bad season or whatever. You can always fall back on the store or whatever.
Yep.
Which you're not going to have that potentially if it got that bad. Even in a disaster relief situation, you potentially get cut off for quite a while. You would probably get airdrops and stuff like that potentially, but I mean, it could be very limited, and it's like, then that becomes the issue of, oh, I want my kids to be able to eat. No, I want my kids to be able to eat.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you got a whole lot of tension going on within the community itself. So,
yeah, and you're gonna be struggling with like, players with bad intentions. Like, you're gonna have your classic. I mean, we've all seen how fast like looting and violent behavior begins, even just from simple things like a sports team winning or losing. You have your riot that starts, and then that just turns into a bunch of people just smashing, grabbing, and doing stuff like that. And it's like being kind of proactively positioning you and your community to deal with something like that is all benefited by good quality reconnaissance.
Yeah.
So, well, just really quick, a little bit of background on, for those that don't know already, just, so everyone kind of knows that, like, we're not just making this stuff up and pulling it out of nowhere, but, so we were both in the Army.
Yep.
And we both, in one way or another, were related to reconnaissance. Steven's definitely, Steven has a reconnaissance background. You were in scout reconnaissance. So.
Yeah.
And then I was a designated marksman and did a lot of like Overwatch, observation post, build up, take down, stuff like that. So it's kind of a surveillance kind of Overwatch mission a lot for me. But Steven's going to be the authority here on everything recon.
Yeah, my background was a little bit more like related to what you can do from, like anyone could do what I was doing, because we didn't have gear that you can't get, besides like, belt-fed machine guns and stuff like that. But I'm saying like, for the most part, we were just hoofing in by foot. We carried what we could on our backs, and that's what we had, man. And most of it was long range. So like, we were never like classified as LERP, but that's like a common, that was like the go-to. That was like a formed reconnaissance efforts in different countries, but it was, long range reconnaissance platoons, which is basically what we did, so, but yeah, so we'll just kind of dive right into the basics, I guess, here.
So I texted Colton that we were doing that. I said, yeah, we're recording. He said, good, it's my time to shine. I'll be over there to smash around in a little bit.
Yeah, it's good.
So I'm glad he knows now.
We'll just kind of dive in.
Yeah.
We'll kind of start at like the just really super basic, but your three types of reconnaissance, which is route, area, and zone reconnaissance. Which they're pretty much exactly what it sounds like. So like route would be like dealing with road systems, looking at supply chains, how they come in and out, or how many, how much military effort they're sending on these roads. Area is going to be like more like if you don't really know the area, which isn't going to really apply if you're doing, like if you're being proactive now, you should pretty well know your area. You should be out doing kind of area reconnaissance, like, passively right now.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of figuring out like everything, how you have different terrain, or like, okay, this would be good for whatever, like this would be a good spot to kind of fortify, or And then you got your zone reconnaissance, which is like, we got this area that is like it's kind of like it's a target of interest, I guess. And we want to try to get as much recon on it as possible, which would be like personnel, vehicles, firearms, everything, pretty much anything that you could possibly point out in that zone. So
like a good example of that would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but would be like if you were occupied by some some like some force. You were occupied by some like opposing force, and they had a staging area. That would be something you would want to go recon, like look at that, figure out what they got, what kind of
basically like what Ukraine's doing with Russia right now. Like obviously Russia's staged, and they know, okay, yeah, they got this many men. Whether it's from drones flying or whatever, but they do know, like the Ukrainians know from just either sending in people to go observe it, or sending in drones to go observe it, or having planes fly over, or whatever it may be. But basically you have an area of interest. You're like, okay, I know that this is like, there's a lot of activity happening in this area. Mm-hmm. So let's go in there, let's send in a small team and go kind of like figure out what the heck's going on, try to gather as much intelligence on this area as much as possible. And that would be routes, basically everything I just talked about, terrain, everything. You're kind of trying to figure out, okay, what's a good area that you could assault this? Like, if you're dealing with like a town or something, it's like, what's an area you could hit this and you'd have, a better fighting position or whatever it may be. But it's all the above.
Right.
So it could be for an attack. It could be just for gathering intelligence. It doesn't necessarily have to be like we're going in to, kick down doors or anything, but it can be. So.
Okay, so I guess starting with like route reconnaissance, what do you think is like what's how do you set up for that? Like what's kind of the main, like what's your main focus when you're getting started
for route reconnaissance?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very dependent on your, I guess, what you're trying to achieve. Because route reconnaissance in my line of work was it was a big mission effort. Like if I got put on like a route, like where I'm checking to see, okay, in and out of traffic, it's usually because I was farther up on a route of an area where we were hitting like a zone reconnaissance on. So that way it's like, okay, we got heads up that you got 10 up armored vehicles heading toward your, position basically into your AO. So it's like, I think that's where, so like if you're having multiple teams, that can come into play, or it could just be like, hey, our the only people coming in and out of the Kenai Peninsula currently are this group of people, and you're kind of seeing, okay, when is their refit times? When is like, you're just trying to get, okay, is it like scheduled? Is it like this day of the week around this time every week or whatever? So that you just sit there and watch it multiple times and figure it out that way.
Figure out patterns and
yeah. So, but actually getting set up for it, I mean, you're gonna do the same thing you do with everything. You're gonna move to the position that you feel. You look at a map, and land navigation is like you gotta have it in order to be good at this stuff. But you're gonna look at a position. You're like, okay, this looks like a good spot to check out. You'll get set up, you'll stop short, obviously you won't go all the way in, and then you'll do like a leader's recon with whoever, in the infantry, like how the infantry has it laid out, it's your PL and like your senior scout observer and like whoever,
some security guys.
Yeah, like a saw gunner or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be that way. Like from a civilian side of it, it's just like, okay, who has the most knowledge on how to do this?
Right.
And you send them with a couple other guys that have some good experience on it, and you go check it out. It's like, okay, we found a really good spot. You pinpoint where you're going, and then you come back, have your little rendezvous, talk about, okay, there's a lot of draws or whatever, so we're just gonna kind of move through a file, and you go get set up. So, Yeah. That's, I mean,
Yeah. So from like a I guess a preemptive perspective, like if you were gonna do, like if you wanted to start doing this stuff now, like if you had a group and you're, coordinating with a team and starting to kind of work together with people from your community, uh, do you think it would be beneficial to like look at a map and be like, all right, if I guess doing like preemptive reconnaissance, like figuring out like what are the main like easy access routes that someone could use, like if a big element was going to come in here, what are the routes that they'd most likely use, and then identifying like routes that offer strategic advantage, so like routes that might flank your community or offer direct infill, routes that could be used for exfil, like trying to, without an occupying force or without some kind of enemy element being here. Do you think it's beneficial to go out and do route reconnaissance and try to establish like main lanes and routes of interest?
I think that would kind of fall more into the area reconnaissance kind of side of it, where you're like kind of what I said before, where you live in this area, do passive reconnaissance as you live there, and it doesn't necessarily like you can passively do reconnaissance in a very active method, like, okay, this is actually what I'm trying to do, but I'm not doing it like where I'm like walking around in full kit and checking things out. I'm not walking through my town like decked out. But yeah, I mean, ultimately you should be looking at that stuff. You should be pinpointing, okay, this is going to be somewhere that they're probably going to want to like hold up if for whatever reason, if you had like some enemy force come into your community, this would be like an easy place for them to kind of like get staged and hang out. So it's like, okay, so that's probably an area that you're going to want to know, like where you can enter in from, where you can exit from, where you could potentially attack from, all that. I mean, you're playing chess kind of in that situation. You're kind of playing a guessing game. So it's like, it's hard to do, but I mean, ultimately just know where you live and the areas where you plan to like be in. So
yeah. So I guess like, so what are the big things you're looking for then, like as a whole? Because it sounds like all of these reconnaissance types end up dovetailing. Like they're all kind of, like for example, if you had to do zone reconnaissance on a target area, all this other stuff's going to happen too. You're probably going to set up route reconnaissance in and out of that zone. And then you're going to obviously have done area reconnaissance because you're going to have like the whole area figured out.
So your area reconnaissance is kind of the first effort, like trying to figure out, okay, like what do we got going on? And that's, if you're going into a different country, like if you're America going into, like when we first went into Iraq or whatever, they obviously did area reconnaissance through, they can just do it. They could honestly do it through satellites or whatever. They can get a lot of information from just, they have just all their resources. View. Yeah. So, so obviously you will have some sort of area reconnaissance hopefully prior to this situation. And that's kind of why we're doing the podcast. It's like, okay, start working on it now. You can start looking around your area, knowing, okay, this is kind of like where I plan to be held up and where am I, look at where you're weak from as well. So like almost do an area reconnaissance on where you're located as well. Like, okay, so this is probably an area that we're pretty weak. So we may want to like try to focus on that if something were to happen or whatever. But as far as like the route and zone, yeah, your route's kind of keep an eye on your zone reconnaissance, and it doesn't always have to happen that way. Like sometimes your zone reconnaissance is doing both. Like you got a guy that's looking at what am I trying to look for? The word, like a high flow traffic area. Like, okay, this is where a lot of people are coming from, but
like an LDA or something.
Yeah. And it may be multiple LDAs in one area. That's the problem. It just kind of depends on the mission that you're going into, and I can't give you a ton of information because ultimately it's very dependent on kind of the area you're in.
Right.
Ultimately, like, I mean,
Met TC.
Yeah, very Met TC. But as far as like going in and getting set up, how we did it, and there's multiple ways to do it, but this is just from my experience. But you go in, you do your leader's recon. They decide you file in. And then there's different words for this sort of stuff too, but we would then go up and set up our serve site, which is like it's short for surveillance site. And that's kind of like your most forward observation post for whatever you're pulling reconnaissance on, whether that's route or zone or area even. So you could do subsurface or surface serve sites. It just depended on the mission, how long you're going to be there. Subsurface was used a whole lot more if we were there for like, if we were going to be there for even 3 days or more, it would just be easier just to be dug in, because it's like, I don't know, in the daylight, it's a tough game. And at nighttime, even with under nods and stuff, you're just not going to get seen.
Yeah.
And thermals, that's another reason you want to go subsurface, is because you're not going to get caught under thermals if you're subsurface for the most part. Like, I mean, we had Apaches and stuff looking for us on certain missions, and they never saw us. So,
Sick.
It
and this is now. So we're starting to get in. Just to preface it a little bit, we're starting to get into. This would be the mission if you were dealing with a hostile environment, or
yeah, that would be like if someone's actually like potential of compromising your position. Like if you're just doing reconnaissance on a like natural disaster kind of situation, like, hey, we got this tsunami or whatever, or like something's, I don't know, or a fire. Fire is a good example. You got
like a wildfire.
You got a wildfire, and your communication has been cut off for whatever reason. Somehow it ends up you're kind of like on your own, and you're basically seeing, okay, how far has it moved? You can check to see, okay, it's moved a mile since the last time we looked at it or whatever. So, so that you wouldn't have to be subsurface for that. There's right. You don't even really have to be. That's just going to be like standing in the woods, like looking out, like that fire's getting closer,
Yeah.
But
I mean, you could be subsurface, I guess, if you wanted to be for that.
That'd be epic.
We're gonna dig a serve site in so the fire doesn't see us.
Dude, if it can't see us, it can't burn us. But yeah, so you do your serve site. Kind of the 3 steps that we use. We use the serve site, a hide site, and then your MSS, which is like your mission surveillance site. And that was kind of like more of your administrative kind of positioning. Like that would be kind of
your the head shed.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even depending on the distance that you're working on, that could just be like your home base,
Right.
Potentially, like depending on how far out you're doing it. For us, we were always out in the middle of nowhere. So your MSS was like your platoon sergeants and lieutenants and all that stuff. Like that's where they all hung out, or even your first sergeants and commanders and stuff like that. But so your serve site is like you're trying to keep like as small of a footprint as possible. So like if you were to dig in, you're everything from you're basically, once you're dug in, you're not leaving. Like you're staying there unless you're compromised. Then you have to do like blowouts and stuff, trying to figure out how to retreat out of those positions and
break contact kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're probably screwed depending on who you're fighting against. But you're as far as communications, you're running on lower frequencies, and you're running under a frequency that you can basically just reach your hide site and have good communication, because you just don't want to give yourself a big footprint like with radio signals and stuff.
It's like low power stuff.
Yeah. So and then your hide site's able then to run directional antennas back to your MSS, which is going to be a much bigger, spread from your serve site to your hide site's going to be pretty close. Like your hide site's basically far enough back that they can do they're going to be like, they're going to be a little bit more, for one, out in the open, but not really at the same time, because they're going to be so much farther back into like vegetation and stuff that you're not going to see them anyways. So they can actually get set up with antennas, like improvised antennas.
They've got no eyes on. Like your serve site has eyes on, whatever you're wanting to look at. And then your hide site is just in radio communication with the serve site.
Yeah.
So they're not only are they not eyes on, but they don't know where they can't see the serve site either.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you could set it up where they could see it, but we tried to avoid that because then you can, like our squad RTO would be in that hide site with our squad leader. And then they would have like a 249 or whatever. But this is very militaristic. But
yeah,
basically, they're set up where they're a bigger element than the serve site. Serve site's a smaller element. It's like, it could be 2-3 guys.
Okay.
Your hide site could be 4-5 guys, So they're going to be able to kind of be like, I don't know. It's almost like a repeater tower in a way, is basically what they're being, because we're ultimately, your serve site's ultimately on the objective, seeing what they see. They're sending back the information to the hide site, and the hide site's just relaying it back to the MSS. So,
right.
Yeah. And they don't have to be dug in or anything. So it makes it a little bit more easy for like the RTO to like do what he needs to do in order to get a directional antenna set up where he's able to push his information back there.
So they're doing more high power comms, like long range comms, but he's aiming it back at wherever the MSS is.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So does your serve site use directional comms, or is it more like omnidirectional, but it's just really low power?
It's omnidirectional low power because you get too bulky when you start doing directional. I mean, nowadays I'm sure there's stuff, and that's why I can't wait to like do more on radio stuff, because I honestly I can't wait to learn it myself. So
yeah,
I wish I would have learned more then when I was in, but that just wasn't really my job. I was always on the serve site, basically being right there on the front line. But so yeah, I mean, you can't really do it without getting exposed. I mean, you could probably, but it would just be more work.
Right.
So, I mean, if the mission, whatever, required you to be more, directional with your communication, then you could probably do it. You just need to somehow figure out how to blend it into the environment.
Yeah.
And then, so there's a lot more that goes into it. Obviously, that's very like basic.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is kind of how an easy way to do it. And then on top of it, if you're not trying to send any communications, then there's other methods as far as just writing down notes and taking pictures and whatever you have to be able to gather intelligence, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you're positioning yourself, pretty close to an element of interest, or like an enemy element, you might as well get as much information as you can. Like you want to, like what we do in like Overwatch positions where we'd set up like, like range cards and stuff, where we'd have like sectors of fire, and, we'd have like known distances, and, we'd be observing an area for a long period of time, which pretty much everything I did was like usually elevated position, surface, I never did anything subsurface. It was always like on the surface, just below the ridge line, camouflaged in, stuff like that. But we would take logs, like we would have like a log, write the date on there, write what time it is, who you are, we'd have like a running log that you'd have to keep updated, at 0527, a truck drove by and went south or whatever,
yeah.
Like
and just give
happens
a description as you can. Like if you can
truck.
see how many people were in the truck, if it's got, weapons mounted to it or whatever, what kind of weapons they are. So you're just trying to gather as much information as possible, what color it is, everything.
Yeah.
Anything and everything. Because ultimately it may not make sense at the time, because it's like, why do they need to know that?
Right.
But if it's like, okay, we keep seeing the same vehicle over and over again all over the place, then you're able to like, because if you're doing multiple reconnaissance efforts in different areas and you're seeing that vehicle, it's like, okay, is this like a higher value target than we think? Like, is this person like who is this, you know? And then you're, I don't know, you connect dots. Basically, you're connecting a bunch of dots that you don't know the answers to in those situations. So, and then that's going into like the actual logistics behind it. That's like a whole nother ball game, because whoever's like kind of like trying to put the dots together is not only got to be an intelligent person and then like kind of think outside the box as well. So
yeah,
but yeah.
So how many people do you think you could do this with, like at a minimum, like this same kind of setup? So like serve site, hide site, MSS.
I mean, you don't need much in the MSS. I mean, as long as you have someone who can who can deal with communications like comms and whatnot. I mean, you could potentially have one guy in the MSS like running it. The only problem is like if you're doing multiple days overnight, it's like, okay, how long is that dude going to be able to keep up with it? Like gathering information, like, because ultimately once he gets back to him, he's kind of the last piece to the puzzle, you know, like if he doesn't keep the information, then it may just get lost beyond that point. So it's like maybe have two guys at least like working days and nights. But as far as like the serve site, I mean, you could have, I would say, two guys at least in there and probably two guys in the hide site. So that would be like your minimum.
So
like
pretty
6
small
guys.
Like actually a pretty small force then.
Yeah. And you could cut out if you absolutely need to. You could, depending on like the location you're in, you could potentially cut out your hide site as well.
Okay.
So if you were in an overhead position, kind of like what you were talking about, where you're hard to see, but you're able to still see everything, you can still set up radios that are directional.
Yeah.
At that point and send it back. Or even if you're just going in for a shorter mission and you're just gathering information, writing everything down, taking pictures, whatever you need to do, and then you're just bringing it back to give the information, then even smaller, you know, you could do it with a 2-man element.
Which would be pretty smart if you're dealing with like an element that might have like advanced radio capabilities, you know?
Yeah.
Because if they have like a listening post set up and you just set up your little serve site and start transmitting like, we see 15 vehicles, and they're just going to be like, what the heck? All right, let's mortar these guys.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, know who you're fighting against, I guess, ultimately, but
which you can usually, I feel like from the reconnaissance perspective, you would probably figure it out pretty quick if they did have listening posts and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, you would. And I think also, like, that would be part of your early, you know, your earlier steps of, if you're hitting an area multiple times to kind of gather intelligence on, like, your first, like, couple times in, you're going to try to keep your radio frequent, or, like, your traffic on the radio like to nothing if you can, until you figure out, okay, what's going on here, you know, what are we dealing with?
Yeah.
Is it the Russians? Is it the Chinese? I don't like who we
yeah.
who do we got up in our homeland right now? So do the British want their people back? It's like, what?
Yeah, the other thing too is like, and this should go without saying, but you know, all of these techniques can be utilized in a lot of different ways. So like, obviously this is more directed towards like a combat element. Like you're set up as a combat element observing another combat element.
Yeah.
But these similar techniques were used on us, like when we were in Afghanistan. Like when I was there, you know, you would have basically guys that were like a mobile, like on foot serve site in a way, little groups of dudes that would observe your element like right in broad daylight, you know, because you can be, you know, if you're just the residents of the area and you're not dealing with somebody that's just killing everyone, you know, you can just be like all civvied up I'm just a regular guy,
Yeah.
and then start sending information back to somebody that you can't see. It was done to us constantly.
Yeah, because I mean, ultimately, if you're dealing with, I mean, it depends on who you're dealing with. I mean, you look at like Russia and Ukraine right now, you can't do that in that situation.
Right.
But if you're dealing with like more of a situation like America and Afghanistan, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like if you have a country that comes over here and they're like, we just want basically to take control of this country. We don't want to kill anyone. Like we just want to basically claim you. You can sit there and as long as you don't have firearms and stuff like that, or at least like not that you can see, it's like you sit there all day and gather intelligence on people, You can have your kids do it even.
Yep.
So
there was little civilian, civilian group civilian group serve sites just constantly walking around while we were over there, Yeah. And you'd see them once we got a little bit out of range, they'd get on their cell phones and pass that information on. So
yeah, and kind of speaking on that vein, I guess, Afghanistan, they did the reconnaissance by force as well, which is, your fourth level of reconnaissance. We didn't really bring it up before because I don't know. I don't really consider it. I mean, it's reconnaissance, but it's very,
it's aggressive. It's not as passive,
Yeah. So that's basically just like, having, you can do it a couple different ways, but ultimately the idea behind it is to be able to see how a force reacts to like an attack. So like have someone ambush and then retreat and just see how the enemy you're dealing with reacts to that little ambush and gather intelligence on how they react to it, basically.
Yeah, it was super common, like in Afghanistan when I went over there and you did like unit changeover. So like the way it would work is you'd have, your combat outposts or whatever, and a unit would occupy that combat outpost for a year or whatever, and then you'd have your changeover where a unit would come and rotate out with that unit. So like when we went over, we replaced, I believe, the 101st, and you get there about 2 months or about a month and a half before the unit leaves, before they're scheduled to leave, and you do like a changeover. So usually in that period, you're like your numbers on the COP are a little bit bigger. They kind of filter you in and out like strategically, so that's you're not beyond capacity, but you usually don't really get messed with during that time period though, because you've got like a ton of people there. But as soon as that unit's basically gone, you start getting like a lot of like harassment. There's a lot of like harassment gunfire and, a lot of like really close IEDs and ambushes and stuff like that. And it's to test the new element to see how fast we responded, to see what our unit SOPs were. Cause they're smart. They knew that, we're all a little bit different. Like we all generally do the same thing, but every unit's got different SOPs and procedures and how they're going to respond to certain things. So that reconnaissance in force, was a really common method used against us. And then we noticed it ramped up again when we were like leaving, when we were like on our way out, because again, you splinter out in waves. And when it got towards the end, they started getting attacked more and stuff. And I was in one of the like middle waves to leave. So, but some of the guys that stayed behind were talking about like, yeah, they started, it'd been forever since they'd attacked our COP and they started ramping it up again.
Yeah.
So
it's smart. I mean, it's a good like guerrilla warfare technique for sure. I mean, like if you're the underdog, it's smart and it keeps everyone on their toes. It lets them know, okay, yeah, you're not wanted here.
Yeah.
So
and do it in a, it's definitely risky, but you can absolutely do it in a way that is, I mean, honestly, most of the times we got attacked, we'd get randomly mortared all the time and we'd get shot at. There was this group of like 12 guys. It's only 12 guys. And there was like a multi-month period where I feel like it was like almost every night they would, and it wasn't, they kept it a little bit sporadic. So it was hard to really figure out when, and it was always kind of at different times, but it was always dark. It was always at nighttime. and they would just randomly start attacking us, and they would be like 900 meters away. So it was funny because they'd always shoot RPGs, but they were beyond the range. RPGs self-detonate at like 700 meters usually.
Yeah.
So we always thought that was funny because they'd shoot RPGs at us and they would never make it to us because they were that far away. But it was smart because, they would plunge, do like plunging fire down into our cop, and no one ever got injured from it or anything like that, but it was just annoying. We'd have to shoot back and try to pin them down and figure it out, but they would basically just engage us and then pack up and leave. Like, I'd say usually right around like 6 to 7 minutes, they'd be out of there.
Yeah, so not very long then.
Yeah, they had it timed down really good. So we'd usually call in like aerial assets. So Wolfpack, which was the Apaches, they would come in, and it'd take them about, we weren't far from Salerno. They'd spin up really quick. It'd take them like 10 minutes to get there, but they were gone. They would attack us and do the harassment thing and, heavy fire stuff for a little bit. And then they would move on the other side of this mountain saddle where we couldn't see them anymore. And by the time aerial assets were on station, they'd just be gone. So they couldn't find them. So It's like, and we, America's arguably the most powerful fighting force in the world. So we had a lot of stuff at our disposal. We had mortars, we had tow missiles. We had obviously like heavy machine guns that were very capable of shooting at that range. And we actually got one night, we had effective return fire because some of the on like battle damage assessment, because you'd have to go up there and figure out so we'd go up there and figure out where their gun positions were and like where you could see where all their like ammo was, which they actually bagged their guns too, which was pretty crazy. So they must have had some kind of sacks or something on the side of their RPKs or whatever they were using. They were using belt-fed stuff. Because you'd only find a little bit of links and like some, like almost never find like brass, or like cartridges, spent cartridges.
Yeah.
Which was pretty cool. Which that's another thing too, like, trying to pick up after yourself and not leave much evidence behind.
Yeah.
But we ended up going up there and there was no bodies up there, but there was a ton of blood, like tons of blood. And it was very clear that somebody got hit or multiple people. There was like 2 different spots. And then we also finally found like a bunch of brass and links and stuff. So that was, that was interesting too. But after that, they never attacked us anymore. So after that little exchange,
I think they were good.
So yeah, we ended up basically getting lucky because it was so hard to shoot at that distance under, night vision. Night vision doesn't see that far very well.
Yeah, and it just shows how I don't want to say easy, but yeah, it shows how easy that someone could do it, with very little.
Yeah. And the only reason we knew it was 12 guys was because we had a raid camera. Like, that was the most frustrating thing is like, America has all these resources at its disposal. Like, we have these big cameras that are on a tower on all these combat outposts, and they can see like miles, and they have like extremely advanced infrared and flare, so like thermal visioning or thermal vision stuff. Thermal imaging, that's what I was trying to say. And they can zoom way in, and record and take pictures and stuff. So the TOC was able to look up at them and be like, oh, there's 12 guys up there, and they would use it to like do like mortar strikes and stuff. But that was another part that was really smart, is that they would position themselves near civilian houses and structures.
They knew that,
so it was really hard to mortar them. I mean, their actual like fighting positions they kept using, which did change a little bit because we thought about trying to ambush them, and there, different platoons set up ambushes and stuff up there. but then they just wouldn't show up. They would just, so they definitely had their own reconnaissance happening, because as soon as we would like get set up and we'd try to do it like super stealthy, and we tried to catch them, we tried to do operations on the other side of that mountain that they would come up, because they'd come up the backside of this mountain where we couldn't see them. And yeah, we just never caught them. The only thing that stopped them was when we, it's just one night I was on the 240 and I was literally just, my feet were just covered in like brass. It was like over 2,000 rounds or something of return fire. So it was pretty fun. But yeah, and then somebody, got lucky basically and probably smoked one of them, but they policed everything up. They grabbed whoever those guys were and got them out of there. So
drug them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they never attacked after that. But
yeah, and that's another thing to, you kind of talked about it, but I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I kind of breezed over it. But having a very small, you don't want anyone to know that you're there. So anything you bring in, you're bringing out, whether that's people or whatever, because
what do you do with your waste?
Like it all gets bagged up and goes with you.
Like your poop and stuff does too?
It depends. I mean, you can bury it, but
okay.
But yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of times I've bagged it up and just put it in my pack and took it out. Like depending on where it was at and when it happened, it's like I don't know. I just didn't use the bathroom that much on those missions. Honestly, I didn't eat much, and I didn't really. I just kind of like was like, yeah, we're keeping it limited.
Yeah.
Because I was in the surf site, and usually we were subsurface when we did our missions, so there's no leaving. Like you're in there for 5 days plus. So
that's crazy.
You're just in it to win it at that point. So yeah. But going to, you kind of talked about thermals, if you have thermals, all that stuff's good. Gear is gonna give you an edge in the reconnaissance world for sure, whether it's thermals, nods, binoculars like a spotting scope, or you can use a scope like a LPVO or whatever, but I don't know,
something with a little more magnification.
Yeah, and a little more light gathering and stuff like that, so you can see better.
How will the binos work?
I hated binos.
Yeah. Like you think they're good for like an individual, but like for setting up an actual serve site or something, you want like a spotting scope.
Yeah, you want something that. I mean, I'm sure there's binos out there that have like better light gathering, but I just don't know. Like a spotting scope just does so much better.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they're hard to beat. So okay, so let's say you've got maybe not even, well, let's say you've got some kind of enemy occupation that happens in your local area, and they set up, so what would be the most effective way to kind of set up this reconnaissance mission without really getting caught, if you could? I mean, I know this is super broad because you don't have a lot of the information, but
it kind of depends on the enemy, because I mean, ultimately, if it's an enemy that's not going to just smoke civilians, the best way to do it would just be to do what you were talking about. Just kind of walk in.
So let's say it's high risk, they're dangerous, can't be seen, you have to be, you are being a combatant element, and so are they.
Yeah.
So more traditional, like conventional setup.
So you're going to do your initial reconnaissance. If you're able to fly drones, and you have drones, that's a good method too, because your chances of, you're not going to lose any lives that way. Even if they take your drone, I mean, the only problem is like even Russia can do this with Ukraine, is they're able to figure out who's running the remote for the drone. So that's kind of like, you're just asking to get mortared basically at that point. So
because it's sending a signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, But if you're just going in and you're doing it kind of old school method, and which is probably what you'd end up having to do, if we'll just use Russia as an example, since they're saying they want Alaska anyways, or whatever. They're not actually saying it, but there keeps being like a bunch of talk about it. So Russia's here. They actually make it to us somehow, which is just a miracle. And you're going to do reconnaissance on them. It kind of depends on what you're trying to get. If you're just trying to gather information, just getting, a higher position, which is going to give you a better view on everything for one. You don't necessarily have to do that, but I definitely wouldn't go lower position as far as like your farthest observing post, like what's actually getting the intelligence. And then if you're up high, you can do more like designated marksman kind of style work, or sniper disciplines, as far as having like guys ready to go to fire, to shoot back and whatnot. But why not if you have the capability to do it?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're like going in there to like try to actually like fight or anything, but you're ready to go in case you have to lone survivor your way out.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, so just going in, doing like a initial reconnaissance to figure out like what a good location is to set up, and then actually basically making a route plan for moving more people in there to like actually observe. Because I think ultimately you can do it with one or two guys, but I think like three guys, at least three would be better. I mean, you got more people watching, and then you're not just getting drained. You get some sleep and stuff like that, but depending on how long you're planning on being out there.
Yeah.
So, and then, but for me, I would do subsurface. Like if I know I'm going to be out there for a while and I'm dealing with like Russians who more than likely have thermals and are going to be able to see you. They potentially have aircraft flying around or whatever. And it's pretty easy. You just basically dig a hole big enough that, how many, like, let's say we got 3 guys, you dig a hole big enough long enough for your tallest guy to lay down and wide enough for everyone to be shoulder to shoulder inside the hole. And then you cut down like trees. I don't want to say like full blown trees, like, I don't know, 2-inch diameter.
So like in Alaska, alders would probably work really good.
You want something kind of straight, so alders would be,
or like little birch trees,
or little spruce.
Yeah. Okay.
Spruce would probably work.
Right.
Just limb them. But honestly, depending on where you're at, you may not need to limb them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like if it's gonna help cover you. But yeah. So you lay those across. You put like a tarp or a poncho over top of that. You use the dirt that you dug out of the hole, and you just kind of put it on top of that, on top of the tarp or poncho. And then you take vegetation from behind. So if you're looking forward toward your objective from behind, you take that vegetation and put it on top. And then you're just not going to see it. People could straight up walk on top of you, and more than likely they're not going to know.
Nice.
Like it just feels like ground.
Yep. And then you just got dudes right underneath you. That's crazy.
Yeah. And then obviously,
so how do you see out?
So you make like a viewport hole.
Okay.
So like if you're up high, it's even easier, but you like basically dig a trench. Like it's the only spot that you could potentially get seen from, but if you do it right, you're not going to get seen from it. But basically you can either run like a net over the top, like just to kind of make it so it's harder to see into the hole, but you're not going to be able to see in it anyway. It's just like a blacked out hole. It almost looks like like if a tree falls over and then you get your root fan that's kind of like peeled up the ground almost, and you got those holes.
Yeah.
Like that same concept, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah, so then you're just looking out that way, and then usually you only can make it so like one guy can see out when you're subsurface. I mean, you don't have as much like view. That's kind of the problem with subsurface. Like with your surface sites, everyone can kind of like peek their head up and look.
Yeah.
hey. But your subsurface is like one guy, like either on a spotting scope or
Oh, so you can set up a spotting scope
Yeah.
looking into that viewport.
oh yeah,
Nice.
yeah. You can set up thermals.
So you're probably pretty far away.
Yeah, you're decent distance. Like you're not like right up on the objective. You can be right up on the objective, but usually if you're right up on the objective, you're not doing a subsurface because you're too close, you're too loud to build it.
Oh yeah. Okay, so I was gonna ask, like, how do you build it? Like, what?
So-
How do you just get in there and start digging around and smashing trees and?
Well, you gotta obviously be a little bit like smart. Like you can't just be as loud as possible, but yeah, you do it at nighttime, man. You do it at a decent distance away, basically, where you can see whatever you're looking down on, and whether it's like a town or.
So you'd probably set up like a hasty above surface.
Yeah, so what you could do is you could do like an overwatch position, like designated marksman over top, like while they dig it, so that way you have some level of security. Not everyone's just out there just digging, you know. And that's why you almost got to bring in a bigger group. That's why that it's kind of all coming back to me as we talk about it, because like I haven't done this stuff in forever. But anyways, and I can't wait to do it with our guys because it's gonna be so much fun.
Yeah.
But so you could set up a position, like whether that's a sniper team or something, just basically a sniper and his spotter or whatever, kind of looking above, kind of being the the defender from above, the eagle.
Yeah.
The eagle's nest. But and then everyone else is, I mean, you want to have some level of security. You can set up like your belt feds in positions where you're worried about like people coming in, but ultimately you're doing it in the middle of the night. Like you're doing it under nods. When we did it under nods every time. And it's usually like in that 2 in the morning to like 3, 4 in the morning kind of time frame.
Right.
So yeah, and then everyone's getting out. Like we used for the first portion of my time in, we used e-tools, nothing but e-tools to dig, and then near the tail end that I was in, we started using shovels that we had just cut down. Like we just used normal size shovels, and we cut them down to where they're a shorter handle length, and those worked better because you're moving dirt a lot quicker than with an e-tool. But the e-tool works good too. I mean, you can do a lot with an e-tool, and really you're just, depending on how much time you have, METTC will go back into that all the time, but because it could become a little more hasty than you plan it to be. You could be digging some pretty hard ground and it's like, dude, this ain't working. Like we're going to have to rethink this. But yeah, so you get dug in, you put your guys in, and then that team that helps you dig in kind of gets out of there. You can pull the sniper teams, or depending on where they're at, you might be able to just leave them. But really, there's no point to have them at that point anymore because they're probably seeing everything that your serve site's seeing. So it's like, why put those guys there? You can move them back with your guys. But yeah.
So.
And then for getting out, I mean, and then obviously there's personal hygiene stuff that you got to worry about. You don't want to be wearing deodorant. Like that stuff's not natural. So
yeah,
you're just going to get busted if you're doing that kind of stuff. Like,
right. Like if a patrol or something comes near you and they start smelling like Axe body spray, they're going to be like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, not being just super clean, like you want to be a little bit like natural.
Yeah, a little raunchy out here.
Yeah, you want that natural.
It's kind of smelling like a bear.
That natural funk, dude.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so natural funk and face paint and proper camouflage, like ghillie suits.
Yeah, you
we
don't
use
want to
ghillie
be
suits as well.
around.
Yeah, no, you don't at all.
Yeah, we'll get into, I want to get into camouflage in a second, but, so once you have this serve site, this dug-in serve site established, you can basically use it indefinitely until it's compromised, right?
In that situation, yeah. So, like, for our SOP, we destroy it on our way out. So we'd always leave at night again. You basically redo everything you did. You'd fill that hole back in and try to cover it up with the vegetation as much as possible. Obviously, that spot's going to die, and, like, if someone was, like, looking, it's like, what was here? Obviously,
like a tracker's going to probably know, like,
They'll figure it out ultimately,
Yeah.
but not for a long time, probably. Like if you do a good job on concealing it, which we did pretty good jobs at concealing it. But sometimes we just leave it,
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably just because we were being lazy, but but yeah, I mean,
so somebody doesn't get his poncho back.
But it no. Well, yeah, I guess we actually always did destroy it now that I think about it, because we always get the poncho back. That'd be random if we just left ponchos. But yes, if you were like, okay, this is going to be happening for a while, like you kind of like create little observation posts everywhere. Like you could potentially set up little observation posts everywhere. You could start doing this now if you wanted to. Just go ahead and start digging in, dude.
Yeah.
That reminds me of like one of the missions we went on. One of my squad leader, he wasn't my squad leader. I was in first squad, but second squad leader was doing their leadership reconnaissance.
Mm-hmm.
And what that entailed for this mission was literally they were just like walking around, just it was a joke. Like it was just for all the squad leaders and platoon sergeants and stuff just to go out and just lollygag around, just kind of walk around.
Yeah.
But the area that second squad was going to be in doing reconnaissance, he noticed that there was a construction site nearby. So he walked over to the guy that was running the excavator and like knocked on the window and was like, "Hey man, if I give you a spot that you can just dig me a hole."
No.
I'm dead serious, this happened. He's like, "I'll bring you a 6-pack of beer." And the guy was like, "Deal." So he told him, "Okay, I want it right over here."
No
literally,
way.
he cruised his squad right in, and they just hopped right into that hole. And then they covered it up, and they were rocking and rolling. Dude. And like I talked to the second squad guys, the guys who were actually in that server site, and they were like, "Dude, it was the most comfy server site we've ever been in, because it was like actually big enough that we could move around it."
Yeah.
I was like, "You guys are lame." Like
that's epic.
Yeah, it's classic, just shenanigans going on in the military. But I mean, yeah.
So keep 6-packs at your disposal for men running excavators.
Yeah, I don't even know when he gave it to him. I don't think he might have jumped it into that mission, but I don't think he did. I think he just like drove it out there one day and like hooked the guy up. But
yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, but
so you could set up your serve site, and then ideally your hide site is going to be, well, obviously your hide site's going to be much closer to the serve site than the serve site is going to be to the objective. So that's how you're dealing with your communications. That's how you're getting around that problem.
Yeah, but they're going to be far enough back that they are not within sight of the actual objective. Like they might be able to like see it, like depending on how big the objective
it is,
is
geographically, but not really see into the objective. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're not going to have directly eyes on, but it's going to allow them to like be able to kind of focus in on more the communication side, like comms and stuff, if they're wanting to run comms. Or they may just be like an element of like almost like a QRF that's close by in case things go south.
Yeah.
If you're not doing any radio communication, you can use them that way.
Are they still trying to be pretty like pretty hidden from like air assets and stuff like that?
Yeah, so it's going to be that's a good point. It's going to be a surface, usually a surface site. You could do a subsurface hide site, and because you have the ability to kind of like work on it the entire time you're there, so you can like kind of get it dug in. You can still run your antennas that you need in order to be directional still from subsurface. But then you can also like do like usually how we did it was we did like I was rarely a part of them, but you basically just build like a little like ring of vegetation, like get into a thick area that's surrounded by a bunch of trees, and then just like add vegetation to kind of like build yourself like a little nest.
Mm-hmm.
In there, almost like kind of like a ranger grave.
Okay.
Which is just like, you can kind of almost like you can slightly dig in and pile up the dirt up a little bit, like little berms around you, and then put vegetation around it. So
yeah.
But from air asset, you're kind of open in those situations from like thermals and stuff like that. But
So you guys don't do any like camo net kind of
No, yeah, you do camo nets.
Because that stuff helps hide from
Yeah.
thermal pretty good.
Yep. So you could do that easily, just string it across. Like if you were to get in like a little group of trees, like I see these all the time in Alaska, and I'm always just like, that would be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But like you can just get in these little, like, it's almost like a little nest of trees, and then it's got a little opening in the middle. And then you got, obviously you got spruce, limbs.
Yeah.
Kind of covering your position anyways. And then you throw on a camo net on top of that, and you're going to be
super hidden, probably.
Yeah.
Aircraft will have a hard time seeing you, and so will thermal. Like, that's because the reason I brought up thermal was because, like, if you're dealing with military air assets, then they're going to be looking at you. They're not just going to be using their naked eyes.
Yeah.
Their naked eyes. They're going to be
naked.
They're going to be looking at you with FLIR,
Yeah.
Thermal imaging from the airplane, down. So
yeah, so that's I wish I could, like, I don't really know. I guess Caden might know how easy it is to, because I've never really like been looking at thermal imaging like up in a plane or whatever to see how.
Well, if Apaches couldn't find you guys, then
Well, I know they can't find you in the surf site. That's
Yeah.
guaranteed. Like you just can't be found.
yeah,
Like if you do a good surf site, like a subsurface surf site, you're just not going to be found. I literally had guys walk on top of me, and like they sent out, like, they told, like, okay, you have, like, because they try to set us up for failure. They'd tell, like, our Op 4 that we were dealing with at the time, like, hey, you got people in your area that are doing reconnaissance on you. See if you can find them. They'd send out little just
patrols.
Yeah, patrols to come find you.
Mm-hmm.
Which happened all the time, pretty much on every mission. Like, they'd have like a patrol. Actually, one time we had a patrol cut behind and between our surf site and our hide site, and we happened to be an open. We were like a ranger grave. We were a surface surf site.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't see us, but we were like, they're heading right toward our hide site. So we called back and we're like, hey, you guys got like 8 dudes coming to your position, all with small arms, And they're like, okay. And they're like, where are they coming from? We kind of give them a directional, like, they're coming, like north to south or whatever. I can't remember what it was, but, and they're like, okay. Well, I guess they just ended up cutting right through, but then they ended up coordinating with, like, I can't remember who it was at the time, but they coordinated with someone to, like, actually, like, smoke these guys. And they just got all just ate up, just laid down.
The Op 4 did?
Yeah, it was
Nice.
it was in JRTC, so
Yeah.
it was like we were using all the laser systems and stuff.
Nice. Okay.
But
Yeah, the old big army laser tag, man.
yeah, laser tagging blanks, dude.
Yep,
Hey, it works.
it
you know?
does.
But yeah. So that's another thing to think about, like gear coming in. If you're gonna be in like that front post, but honestly, both areas, hide site and surf site, however long you're gonna be out there, you got to be prepared to like carry that in with you. So, I used an Alice pack all the way through my time in, and it was always enough
Mm-hmm.
to get me through. But like I said, I didn't eat much.
Right.
Like, I just drank water, and I would eat like maybe an MRE a day, but not really even. Like, I would just pick out what I liked.
Yeah.
I was picky. I was like, no, I'm not eating that.
Which technically an MRE is enough for the day anyways. So.
No, it is. But I wouldn't eat the whole MRE. I was like, no, I'm not eating that weird, whatever that is. But
You just ate whatever would keep you constipated so you didn't have to poop out there?
I just didn't eat that much in
Yeah.
general. I don't know. I was like that guy who just wasn't going to eat much. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
That's crazy. So yeah, that's obviously a lot more, intentional, like.
yeah, you're dealing with an actual enemy.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's good stuff to know. I think, it's good stuff. Like all the passive reconnaissance, like, I guess take these main points, route, area, and zone, and start implementing it now. Like, I think that's something that you can do now.
Yeah, and start working on, specific skills because you're dealing with longer range stuff. Start working on, how to,
like overnight sustainment and
how to like just survive, because bushcraft skills, some of that stuff's super important. Land navigation. If you're out there for a while and you do run out of food, know how to get more food. Set snares and know how to do all that stuff. Like, it's important because you don't want your mission to end just because you didn't pack right or something like that. Like, know what you're doing. Like, think ahead, plan stuff out, actually have like purpose. Don't just be like, oh yeah, we're just going to go out there and go watch these guys.
Can you do like a change out? Like, if there's guys in the serve site, are you able to like send dudes to
like
relieve
a refit?
them? Yeah.
You could.
It's probably risky though.
It's risky, and you're sending a bunch of guys in that potentially don't really like,
they don't know it's the area. Like,
yeah, you've been like, if you got like a group of guys that have been out there for 3 days, they kind of know like the habits of people. Like, hey, this guy usually comes out and takes a poop over here like around this time of the day.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to be like, we're not going to be like making too much noise during this time because he gets pretty close to like our position or whatever.
Right.
I don't know, just like little stuff. I just feel like it's easier just to keep the people in there. And then it's like every time you're like when you're building and when you're getting out of there, it's like a risk you're taking at getting caught.
Yeah.
So like when you're digging in and then you're getting out. So why would you take that risk like mid-mission to like refit? I feel like it's not.
Right. So on that, what do you do if you get caught? Like, let's say you've got your serve site all built and you get compromised, like somehow people spot you or something. What is your...
So like we're already in, or we're...
Well, we'll start the other way. So you're setting up and you get caught. We'll start there.
Setting up and you get caught, you're just going to do you got your full... So like if it's me, I'm going in with an entire squad size element. So you basically have an alpha team, bravo team size element out there. What we usually did was like your alpha team would be the guy that's the group of people in the serve site. So you have an entire team out there. So we'd have 4 or 5 guys. Usually we'd cut it short. So like maybe one of your alpha team members would go back to the hide site. So you have like 3 or 4 guys in there. But you're just reacting the same way you would for reacting to contact at that point.
Okay.
You start shooting back, you return fire, you call, your 3Ds, and then, you get online with, and then you decide, okay, well, we probably aren't matched up to actually stay in this fight, so we're going to try to get out.
Try to break contact?
Yeah.
Okay. And then
also
dug in.
Also, like in the big army world, you also have like festers and stuff. Like you have mortar, like you have capabilities of mortars and stuff. So it's like, okay, you just call for the position. Like, hey, hit them. Like we're bailing out, So they start dropping mortars as you're bounding out. But, but anyways, what were you saying?
So once you're dug in,
you're a smaller group. You're basically doing the same thing. Like our standard was like your usually the most effective weapon we had on board when we were in our surveillance site was the saw, the 249. So you get your 249 out and you just have that dude start dumping rounds, just unloading. While everyone else packs up, because you got to get everything out of there, your radios, all your crap. So,
right.
But if you do it right, you should be ready to go. So it shouldn't take that long. You should be not like just gypsy camped in there. You should be like pretty well packed up and ready to go at all times. But and then you just start trying to bound back, and usually you radio back to like your hide site, like, hey, which they're gonna know. They're gonna they're gonna be like, oh, dude. So those guys, like, you can have, rally points designated, like this is where we're going, because we're gonna be split up at this point. It's like, okay, this is how much time, you kind of do like a GOTWA, which is like, it's not a full GOTWA, but basically like this is how much time that we need to be back at this position. Otherwise we just didn't make it, you know? So you have like pre-designated like times and places that you're going to meet up at if things go south, basically.
And this is where, this is where that like those coordination skills mesh a bunch with like that land navigation stuff.
Because I mean, you might have GPSs and you can just, okay, this is the GPS coordinates I'm going to. This is our, rally point Charlie or whatever. This is our emergency plan right here. And you just, you have like your wrist. We always rock the wrist GPSs, the Garmin's, but, and you just kind of set it in and you cruise, man. But I mean, it's a whole different ballgame when you're actually like trying to bound out and you're trying to figure out, okay, like I'm trying to get to this location. So I got to figure out, where I'm going. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like ultimately, if that time expires and it's like, okay, I already know they're leaving and you guys could still be alive. It's like, well, they're supposed to leave after this, this amount of time. So, they're not going to be there when we get there. So we might as well just go wherever best fits us to try to survive.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like knowing your surroundings, knowing like kind of the terrain around you is like important, because it's like, okay, I'm going to do a lot better if I go into, thicker vegetation or whatever, because we're a small group of people. We're going to be able to move faster than like a big element, or move better than vehicles would through this stuff. So it's like force them to have to do what you're doing, basically, like make them go on foot as well. But
crazy.
It's not good if you get caught.
Yeah.
Because you're using such small teams in those situations. It's like, I mean, in a way, you're almost kind of doing what, like the reconnaissance by force.
Yeah.
Unintentionally.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you've done your initial setup right, though, like that shouldn't happen. As long as you've done your
the logistics on before going in should be like pretty extravagant. Like you should have emergency plans. You should have all that set up prior to going in. Like you're not just going in and like, all right, we're gonna go get sat down. Like that's why like you hated it when you're in the military. All like the redundancies, like, okay, well, let's get our packing list. Let's make sure everyone's got it, lay it all out. But it's like, dude, you look back on it and it's like, well, it makes sense now, because you're dealing with a bunch of, like, the leadership's dealing with a bunch of guys that they're not, I mean, until they've been around you enough and realize, okay, yeah, this guy's squared away or whatever. But they're dealing with a bunch of guys that they can't really count on at that point. So it's kind of like, I don't know. You're just like, okay, well, let's just do this, because I don't want, this brand new dude to just be all ate up out there and cause us problems because he's being an idiot.
Yeah, because you just don't know at first.
No.
So,
and that's why, like, from like within your community or like within your group of guys, like if you have a team, like just start working on this stuff now, so everyone's like at least has kind of a baseline on how to do some of the skills,
Yeah, and the best way to do it is just go out.
Yeah, you'll learn a lot of it. I mean, it's
gonna be fun.
It's a lot of common sense too. Like, it's not anything extravagant really to do like reconnaissance. Like, basically, don't get seen and get in a position where it's like, don't get seen is like pretty much it ultimately. But like that's literally the only thing you have to do in the reconnaissance world.
Yeah,
is like just don't get seen, which, you can make it a lot easier on yourself. Like, I could go out there and I could probably lay in a ghillie suit and be super still with a, some sort of IR, they make those nets that are like IR, like you can hide your silhouette. And it's like, I could just sit out there and lay out there with one of those on. That's it.
Yeah.
And probably not get seen, but I'm not going to be able to move around. I'm not going to be able to do anything the whole time. Like, I'm just going to be stuck in that position the whole time, which is miserable.
Yeah.
So have a plan where your guys aren't just like hating life while they're out there. Like, it still sucks regardless, but at least if you're in a hole, you can kind of like shift around and move positions. Like, you're like, okay.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that maintaining that morale too is so important, because it the more like crappy it is, the less effective you're going to be. You know, like if I'm super miserable, I'm going to stop caring about what the enemy you're observing is doing.
Yeah.
You know? You're going to start like putting your head down and like closing your eyes and like trying to like position yourself where you're comfortable, and then your situational awareness diminishes.
Yeah.
So then you're not even effective anymore. You're just randomly out there.
Yeah, because if you get so miserable to the point where you just don't even care, like, it's like, what's the point of living anymore? And then it's like, ultimately, you've lost this battle.
What's the point of living anymore, dude? And I've totally been there. In miserable training and real world situations.
Yeah, if you've gotten to that point, it's like, dude, it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth going out on the reconnaissance mission in the first place. Like,
that literally. So when I was in Afghanistan, we were in an OP, and I was the DM, so I had my counter sniper platform, and then I was with the gun team. So it was we had our gunner and then an AG. 240 Bravos, and then we had a forward observer. And well, this was Afghanistan. This was like January, like late January over there, and it gets cold over there. Like, I mean, it gets cold, which you wouldn't expect, because I think everybody always envisions like it's really hot and like arid. No, in the wintertime, especially at night, I mean, it was like 20 degrees. It was like 19, 20 degrees.
yeah.
And we had on just like our OCPs, like just our basic like uniforms. There was no, because we went on an air assault. It was an air assault mission, so we flew out on Chinooks to hit this objective. So we had to go set up this OP, and we went up and set it up. It's all nighttime, and then we were going to do a nighttime raid. So our platoon pushed down into this village, so we had the Overwatch set up. Dude, that's the coldest I've ever been in my life. Like, and I was stationed here. I was here, like, did cold weather survival up in Fort Greeley, and slept outside in like negative 50 degrees, and that was cold, but not as cold as this. Like, it was like 19, 20 degrees, and I remember being up there like behind the gun, like dug in, in our little like rocky positions,
Yeah.
above surface stuff. But and we got so miserable that we just weren't even doing our job anymore, like hardly at all. Like, because you're supposed to like stay behind the gun and like look through the scope and like look at areas of interest, and it just turned into like trying to huddle into a whoopee. Like, we got our whoopies out of our bags, and we're trying to like snuggle in, and we're just shaking. And one of the guys actually fell in a creek like on our way up to this.
Yeah.
So he literally was like covered in ice. Like, I remember looking at him and being like, are you going to die? Like, he was actually my section leader, and he was just like, I just looked at him, and he literally looked like he was going to freeze, like, freeze to death. He was just white. Like, he literally was just covered in ice. So yeah, we were so miserable, like, and everything started to diminish. Like, we started to like it started like everyone was behind the guns. We were in position. Like, we had a guy on the spotting scope. Our forward observer, like, hit his silhouette, and like he had his antenna running like along the ridge, so you can't, so it wasn't like being telegraphed.
Yeah.
And then it just turned into like we slowly like got into like more comfortable positions, and then we got like our whoobies out, and you go from talking like, I'm gonna move right over here to your left. Then it just became like, can you get your whoopee out of your bag? It's getting more and more loud. Like, did you bring your whoopee? No, dude. Okay. And then like you just start getting disgruntled. Yeah. It happens so fast. I mean, thankfully it was like, we still daytime happened, and like, so the sun came up and it like drastically warmed up. Like, that was so relieving. I remember being like, dude, like, we made it. My buddy, I remember he was like, what time is it? He kept asking what time it was. And because he forgot his watch, and it was like minutes had gone by, but it felt like hours. He's like, what time is it? When's the sun going to come up? I was like, well, the sun comes up at like 7. He's like, what time is it? I was like, dude, it's like 4:15. And he was like, you know, a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then, dude, what time is it? I'd be like, it's like 4:27, dude. You'd be like, you know, just getting so like frustrated. Oh man, it was funny.
Yeah. So ultimately, pack gear. That's going to keep you comfy.
Gotta keep your morale up because it's so hard to be effective. I mean, that was in, you know, we were overseas in a combat area, like hitting an objective with, you know, what Intel said, there's bad dudes here, which they ended up not being there. We hit this objective and it was just like classic.
All for naught.
But still, it just goes to show.
You hit it, but
yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, make sure you have the proper gear, man. Like, yeah, it might be heavy to carry it all out, but ultimately you're not going to be good for anything if you're just miserable out there and you're potentially putting other people's lives into danger because you're not able to actually do your job effectively.
Yeah, and when moving fast is not a huge priority, like being able to, you know, move super quick, light and fast, which you want to be pretty light and fast, I think, in the reconnaissance mission. But
yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, if you're also moving quiet, you know, slower and quiet and a little more quiet, it's like throw some of those extra things in. Because I promise you, I've never been like, I've been in a lot of miserable situations, especially being stationed up here where it's like super cold and harsh conditions. And I have never, not once, like pulled something out of my ruck that I was like, oh, I just knew I was going to need this. Some stuff that maybe made my ruck a lot heavier. In that moment, I've never been like, dude, this stuff made my ruck heavy. Like, I hate that I brought it. I've always been like, oh my goodness, I'm so thankful I dealt with that, you know, painful movement because now I have this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So, and I don't mean like overpack your gear. That's not what I'm saying. But when you're doing your,
well, if you know if you're going to be in cold weather, bring cold weather gear because like ultimately you're going to be in it for a while.
Yeah. And bring like little things, like bring more socks than you think you need. And
yeah, because you want to stay dry.
Yeah. And like bring extra food, like candy bars and stuff go a long ways for like just giving you a little boost.
Yeah.
You know, like I just would throw like some Snickers bars and stuff like that, some Lickies and Chewies.
Yep.
I was the Lickies and Chewies master, dude. I always had like little gummies and stuff like that. But dude, they will greatly improve your mood. If you're cold and wet and tired and you just like literally your brain will go, oh, like when you're like, dude, I have a you know, a Snickers bar in my pack. You just get like a little excited, like so happy right now.
Yeah.
And you open it up and eat it, and it's like all that sugar and stuff hits you. And
my buddy would always have Werther's
energy.
Original.
Oh, nice,
dude. He'd always whip those bad boys out, dude, and it would just make your day.
Yeah,
like, hey, you want a Werther's?
Suck on one of those.
You want the old man candy? And I'd be like, yes, please, dude.
That's sick.
And I'd just sit there and try not to chew it because if you chew it, you just ruin it.
Dude, hard candy is really good to have. Like, I would do Jolly Ranchers. Like, just have a little bag of Jolly Ranchers.
Jolly Ranchers just make my mouth go like into weird positions.
What do you mean?
Like, it's just like it almost numbs your mouth. Like after a certain point, you know. Like,
yeah, I mean, Werther's is legit. That'd be a good one.
Yeah, just sit there and you're just like observing and you're like, and it like kind of helps you keep awake too, because there's times where you're just like, dude, I just want to go to sleep so bad.
Yeah.
But I mean, ultimately, if you're in a situation where you're actually having to gather reconnaissance for, you know, your community in order to like, okay, like let's keep an edge, like let's stay one step ahead, you know, or two steps ahead. I think you're gonna be a little more motivated to like do a good job, I feel like. But,
yeah, for sure.
I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know.
So what are some, so focusing, you know, we kind of already started by default kind of pushing into like some gear stuff. I mean, obviously like things to put in your ruck is like a whole other conversation. So we'll save that for a different podcast because I think, and
like
that goes beyond.
For the reconnaissance mission, like what to put in your ruck, you're saying?
Well, I was saying,
I mean, obviously that's a different podcast, but I'm just saying, like, it's kind of dependent on what your mission is. Like, I feel like what you're putting in your ruck, but
So I guess what are some gear, just basic gear items in general that are good for the reconnaissance mission, and then as we push
like
through
for
that,
observation mostly, or for just personal level?
Both. So we could get into kind of that, and then also some camouflage considerations a little bit.
Yeah, so we kind of hit on it earlier, but obviously thermals are huge because you're able to actually see. Sometimes you can't tell. Like, okay, it's like if you're getting quick shots of like people getting in and out of vehicles, you're gonna be able to obtain that information so much better under thermals. I feel like at least I could. It's like, okay, that was definitely 4 people I could tell. Mm. Or, if it's in the middle of the day, then it's pretty easy. But if it's nighttime, it's hard under NVGs, especially if you're using, like greens, because we weren't rocking like white phosphorus or anything like that back then. Mm-hmm. So that might be nice under that right now, but we'll know more in the future. But so where was I going? Oh yeah, so night vision, thermals, spotting scope, a good spotting scope too. Like you want to have something that can take in lots of light, because that's going to give you longer days of being able to look through the spotting scope. Your spotting scope is going to be your best friend by far. Like your NVGs and thermals are nice and whatnot, but ultimately you're going to obtain the most information during the daytime because that's when all the activity is happening anyways.
Yeah.
So you want to have a good spotting scope. That I would say that's probably like
excuse me,
number one,
yeah,
for like gear items. Like you're going to do the most with a good spotting scope.
And he keeps saying with good light transmission, and what basically all that is a big objective lens. So the bigger the lens is, and the better the glass quality is and stuff like that, will allow more light to transmit through the scope to your eye, which lets you see better. So that's basically what that means.
Yeah, thank you. And then as far as gear, like in order to build a subsurface serve site, you have to have obviously shovels. Mm-hmm. You got to have a tarp or ponchos. Like for us, we try to have all our guys either have a tarp or a poncho. Like usually just a poncho, because poncho does a lot more. You can use it for yourself. You can use it for your ruck. You can use it for, a serve site. You can use it for a bunch of different things. You can make a shelter out of it. You can do tons of stuff with a poncho. You can do the same thing with a tarp, I guess, technically, but tarps are just like a little more loud and just kind of bulky and crazy. Yeah. Like a poncho you can stuff into like we're running Alice/Malice packs pretty much, like me and you are. And you can stuff those into the pouches, like the individual pouches on the front. Mm-hmm. No problem, and then you can get to it really quickly. You could
probably, you can get multiples in those, really.
Yeah,
bunch of ponchos.
Yeah, so have your poncho have like a saw of some sort, whether that's just like a folder, like that just folds into the handle, or you can get like those chain ones that have a handle on either side, and you can like do like almost like a saw, like a chainsaw blade that's not actually connected to like the bar of the chainsaw, basically. Right. Is what it is. And that's pretty much exactly what it is, with handles on either side, so you can like just go to town with it. Those things work fantastic, and they pack down super tight. Maybe like a little hatchet or something, that works good for delemming and honestly just survival in general, just being out in the woods. So I know like a lot of guys, well, I don't know of a lot of guys, but I feel like a lot of people kind of hate on putting that kind of stuff on your ruck. But like when you're doing that kind of work, you'd be surprised how much you use it, I guess. And then obviously you need face paint. And, you need a lot of stuff. If you're going into cold weather, obviously you need warm weather gear, whether that's just layers or, poncho liners or warm sleeping bags.
Yeah.
Sleeping pads if you're going to be like in snow.
Yeah, you got to stay off the ground for sure.
So, and if you get compromised, it's harder to pack up and get out of there with all that stuff. But like in my experience, like if you can get into your subsurface serve site without getting spotted, like not getting compromised and building it, you're more than likely going to make it all the way through.
Yeah.
Because you're really like, as long as you're not being dumb and being loud in there or something, you're going to be all right.
Right.
So you can kind of get comfy because you're going to be in there for a while. It's like, all right, everyone lay out their sleeping pads because we're in the snow and it's cold and the ground's frozen. So we can all be like insulated off the ground a little bit, you know. And yeah. I mean, don't just, like I said, don't just gypsy camp it because you got to be able to move.
Right.
But
keep your stuff consolidated.
But also don't freeze, so.
Yeah.
But,
or overheat if you're in extreme heat or something.
Yeah, which
I feel like that's easier.
I was going to say subsurface surf sites are nice for heat.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's cooler in there. You're like, oh, man, I'm nice. It's in the shade. You're just hanging out. You're not in the sun anymore. Like, that was my biggest regret in JRTC because we were there in August, which is, like, the hottest time of the year to be there in Louisiana. And, like, all our surf sites we did there were surface subsites, like, or surface surf sites, which were, like, just out in the middle of the sun. Like, every day I remember just, like, watching it, like, come up and just, like, watching it go overhead and then eventually going down. But I would just be like, oh boy, here we go again. Like, every time it'd start to peak out,
yeah,
I'd be like, oh man, we're gonna get roasted again.
What do you do if you're subsurface? I've meant to ask this earlier, but how do you deal with like rain, like bunch of rain and stuff like that?
That's a good question. I never really had any issues with it.
Really?
Yeah, I think it just like, I mean, I guess if you got dumped on, you'd eventually start coming in, but so I mean, we got rained on hard and it never would come in.
Oh, okay. Crazy.
And I don't know if it was just because like we're always like up on a higher objective, you know, like usually you're up a little bit higher and then you're dug in and you have like a poncho and dirt and stuff. So it's like, it's basically like you basically have a ground floor above you.
So you're not worried about, so you don't have to build like trenches to like run water away or anything like that.
I never had any of that issues.
Okay.
And I mean, it rained pretty hard in North Carolina whenever we do it. So
it rained super hard down there.
Yeah, the only water that would ever get in there was when you had to take a leak.
And for that, would you just make a little hole or what?
Yeah, dude, it just turns into like basically like a cat litter box, dude.
No way.
Yeah, dude. What we do usually, you
don't piss in bottles or anything.
I mean, you could, but nah, dude. I didn't. Like, why?
Dude, you just peeing all over the place in there then?
No, you know,
okay.
You dig a little hole that's like in line with your junk.
Yeah.
And then you plank, and you just do a plank. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the workout plank.
Yeah.
So you're like elevated off the ground on your elbows because it's not very tall. Like they always said, like the standard was, it's as long as like, so like the standard for like by the book subsurface surf site, this was like your minimum requirements. As tall as your tallest person in there. So as long as your tallest person laying down, as wide as everyone's shoulder to shoulder that's going in, and then deep enough that your tallest person can sit up in there, like sit on his butt. Which never happened. That part never happened. It never was that tall.
It ended up being way lower than that.
Yeah, it was just like you were just laying in there pretty much the whole time.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of digging to get it that low.
Dude, yeah, you have to dig a lot. And you're talking about just like in the middle of the night, you just rucked in like miles and miles and miles. Like you just did a 10-mile ruck march with a 110-pound ruck on. And now you got to dig a hole in a couple hours.
Yeah, and not get seen while you're doing it.
And not get seen. You're exhausted, dude. Yeah. You're tired. It's the middle of the night. You haven't slept yet. You jumped in probably. We airborne jumped in that night and then randomly loaded up on a Blackhawk and flew over to this other spot, which never made any sense that we'd always do that. But we pretty much always did that for whatever reason. I think it was just to get an airborne jump out of the way. Like, okay, well, we might as well get a jump out of the way. Get you guys, like, keep you guys up to date. But
yeah, because in a real situation, you'd airborne op in and then deploy from there. You know, that was because you probably had to jump on a drop zone. But then your training location with Op 4 and everything was
somewhere else.
Offsite.
Yeah. So, anyways, where was I at?
Helicopters and airborne ops don't seem to mix well, though. That always, like, weirded me out. You got like an active airfield and then just rotors.
They usually didn't come until later. Like usually we would do like I don't know, just like a little patrol base for like the first night, like just like letting everyone get down, like because we are usually like we kind of did all sorts of weird stuff, but like we would usually like jump in and we'd secure the FLS, so like the landing strip, and we do that, and then that way the whoever we jumped in with could come down and land and then drop off all our gear. So usually we like jumped in with assault packs. We never jumped in with our rucks. Well, I don't say never, but like anytime we were gonna get Black Hawked out,
yeah,
usually we would jump in with Alice packs, and then they would come in and land, and then we'd get our rucks and drop our Alice pack, or not Alice packs, or assault packs.
Yeah.
But anyways,
which is a smaller bag. It's just like a 24-hour bag.
Yeah, it's like just a day pack basically, but which is nice because it's like you can move way faster with those than you can with a big old rucksack. But yeah, I mean, ultimately don't skimp on gear, but also don't go overboard either. Like,
yeah, you don't need a bunch of super fancy stuff. Like technically you don't even need NVGs and thermals. I mean, Steven was just saying they help a ton.
Yeah, it's just tools to help. I mean, the same thing with drones, like depending on the type of people you're going up against, drones could be effective. I mean, if you're dealing with more like some group of people is taking advantage of a disaster situation and they're just, they got a big group of people and they're just
warlording around.
Yeah, they're just warlording around, just being the bullies on the block, dude, and you just need to go in and do a little recon on them. You're going to be able to fly drones on those people all day long. They're not going to know.
Yeah.
I mean, unless they're like way more prepared than you think, but I just highly doubt it. Like,
yeah.
And if they are, oh well, they don't have mortars. I guarantee that. So.
Yeah. True. So what about camouflage considerations?
Yeah. So obviously you want to look at your area. You want to look at, like for us, we have quite a few different seasons. So depending on the season, you're going to have different camouflage that's going to work good. You can be very militaristic and be like, okay, I'm going to try to do a one size fits all, but ultimately that's probably not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, at least.
Yeah.
That's where like different types of camo nets and things like that can come into play if you are just planning on, like, let's say you're planning on just running multicams and that's it. Yeah, multicams does pretty good at just about everything, but it doesn't do great at anything really. So, I mean, it does great in some things, I guess. Over in Afghanistan,
it did really good in Afghanistan. Yeah,
yeah. It was literally it's perfect for that environment. But for us, I mean, not only is it about camouflage, but it's about identification of like your personnel as well.
Right.
Which is very important as well. Like, you don't want to be like, hey, I got these people coming up on me. It's like your own guys, and you're getting all freaked out, and you think you got to like bail out of the serve site because you got like your group of your own guys coming up.
Because they just know exactly where you're at, and they're just coming to you.
It's like, yeah, so I mean that's important as well, and then also because you're moving and you're moving and spread out, like you're doing long range work, like you're spread far apart, and you're doing there's a lot of potential of like friendly fire in those situations, so.
Being able to positively identify each other is like so big.
Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing it in Ukraine even right now. Like they've resorted to like armbands, like the yellow armbands and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
but you want something that works well too. So if you are in the reconnaissance world, I mean, obviously you're not getting super close. Like, so having bigger camo patterns, works better for breaking up your silhouette at distance, where tighter patterns work good for like closer up. It breaks up your pattern better. So take that into consideration.
Micro patterns work better at closer ranges, you're saying, and then like your bigger patterns like M81 or whatever are gonna work better at spread out.
Yeah, it's gonna break up your silhouette from a distance away. Because ultimately, if you have like a really tight pattern, it's just gonna look like whatever the darker color is, like at a distance. It's just gonna look like, like multicam just looks tan from far away. It's like it just looks like you said, it looks like plywood from far away.
Yeah,
like it looks like just OSB, dude.
Yep.
But which it does. Like if you look at a building being built and you just look at the OSB before they like start doing the siding, it's like, man, that does look like multicam. Like if you just glance at it, it's kind of crazy.
Arid. Yep. So what about like face paints and stuff? I know you mentioned it earlier, but
Like what kinds of face paint to use or what?
yeah, and like that's absolutely necessary, right?
Yeah, it definitely is, especially if you're darker complexion, then you have an advantage, I feel like. But
Yeah.
if you're just white facing around, like super just bright, like me
Just
and Jacob.
corn-fed.
Yeah.
Just corn-fed Southern boy. You just got this bright white face. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're that Norwegian special, you might want to put some face paint on. But yeah, if you got dark skin though, you kind of have an advantage. I mean, you don't really even need it that much.
Like maybe just a little bit to break it up.
Yeah.
Do you do your hands too, or are you just wearing gloves?
I just wear gloves usually. And like your hands just get so dirty just from like being out there.
Right.
That it's like, I don't know. I just feel like my hands just like your face doesn't get like just beat up randomly out there. Like you don't just get like dirty face. I mean you do, like you get sweat and stuff, but like you have to like it's not like you're rubbing your face in the ground and stuff. Like your hands are like constantly in the dirt doing this stuff. But so like I didn't really rock gloves, but my hands were always just like covered in clay and dirt and stuff, so it's like whatever. But yeah, I mean there's different face paint. I mean the best thing, it's cheap. Face paint's cheap. Just get a couple different types of face paint, whether it's the kinds that comes in the tubes or the kinds that comes in the little rectangular square, or you can actually get some that's like actually like paint, like it's like comes out of a squirt bottle.
Mm-hmm.
It's very like dependent on what you prefer. You know, some it's like, yeah, it works really good, but you gotta like just be ready to just like smash it into your face in order for it to stick.
Yeah.
And then like you're like you gotta be ready to like lose layers of your epidermis in order to like put it on. Like you take it off and you're just red faced because you're actually down to like a new layer of skin.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And then you got like the kind that's like comes out of the bottles that spread really nicely. Like I had this guy, his name was Sergeant Simpson that I worked with. He was an absolute character. That's the best way I can describe him. But anyways, he would just take the squirt bottle stuff, and he was bald, so he would literally just paint his entire face green to start with. Literally, he would be green from the neck up, like he
just
was
Green Man Group, dude.
Yeah, he would just be a green face, like he looked like Shrek. He didn't actually look like Shrek because he was a thinner guy, but yeah, so he would just be green face, and then he would start adding in like blacks and browns and whatever, however he wanted to like do it. But and there's different strategies you can find that like you want to like basically you want to like flatten out your face is like the best way I can describe it. Like you want to bring your lower features up and your more like extravagant features back.
Become flat Stanley.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Because then it doesn't look like a face anymore, you know? Like if you were just see it in the woods, it's like that doesn't look like a face because, you know. So you like, yeah, I mean, there's literally videos and all sorts of stuff to figure out how to actually do face paint, but ultimately picking out what kind of face paint you want, but oh yeah, what I was saying about the squirt bottles is that stuff dries up and it's like you like move your eyebrows and you can like
oh yeah,
you know what I mean, like you can feel it like cracking on your forehead, which I hated that, dude. Like I couldn't stand it. So I was like definitely one of the guys that was either using like the tubes, and what you could do is you could take like a lighter and kind of heat it up because they were in like a metal tube.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it was hot enough outside, it would work too. But try to heat it up some before you put it on because like I said, I mean, you're just like removing layers of skin trying to put that stuff on.
Yeah.
And usually you have to like put it on throughout your mission because it just melts away. Usually like for me, it would stay like where I grow facial hair because it would like those pores are a little bigger, so it just like hang on to in that area. Plus I'd have hair kind of starting to grow and stuff.
Yeah.
But then it would just like sweat away in my forehead and like below my eyes and stuff like that. So you have to just like every once in a while.
Places you touch your face a lot too.
Yeah. 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 So then you just look ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's kind of a pain.
Do you
You get used to it though.
What's the best kind of headgear for this kind of stuff?
Oh, dude. boonies.
The boonie hat.
The boonie, dude. All the fuds will sing and praise and clap their hands, dude.
I knew my boonie would come in handy.
No, yeah,
It's hard to beat them, right?
It works good because it. I mean, for one, you can get it in camouflage. For two, it keeps the sun out of your eyes, and yeah, they just work good. It's good camouflage, but it also keeps the sun out of your eyes so you can see well, and they're comfy too. It's like, I mean, you could rock a baseball cap too, I guess technically, and you'd kind of have the same.
I feel like the boonie hats like cover your ears and stuff.
Yeah, it keeps water off you too. If it's raining, you just kind of like it's a little bucket to keep you safe, dude.
Yeah. Is there any kind of mods you can do to your boonie hat that are worthwhile?
It makes me think of the podcast where Caden said, "Oh man, that podcast was good." Caden said that. I'm not gonna be able to get it together because it was so funny. But he's saying like when the boonie dropped down and got in between his 1911 hammer.
Oh, you're talking about when the brim's too long.
Yeah. So you can shorten up your boonie brim so that way it's not like so just like sunflower hat-ish.
Yeah.
Which newer boonies are already pretty much like that right out the gate. Like they're not as quite as like there's some old school boonies that's like, dang, dude.
It's like wearing a sombrero.
It's like, dude. Yeah, like what is going on right now? Are we eating like we about to pull out the freaking I don't know what, like we're gonna be eating some Mexican food or something here soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can if you got one of those, you can I always cut them down to like a couple threads in, and then I just roughed them up just to make them look a little bit more Racky style, dude. Or you can do like that Grand Theft modification where you pin them back and
like so the
just look like a foreigner.
Yeah,
but I'm not into that. I don't like that. Like
you never did that.
No, that's way too just like I don't know, dude. I mean, it's cool, whatever, like, to each their own, but yeah. I just feel like it's, like, way too much upkeep. I just, like, be able to throw on a boonie whichever direction I want to throw it on. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, I'll just slap it on my head.
So what do you do with your drawstring? You just get rid of that thing?
Dude, I had cut those things off.
Okay, so you don't do the tie up and over, so you're looking like, so you're out there looking like...
Canadian, like, freaking Mounties?
Yeah, whatever I'm trying to say. Crocodile Dundee. You get the...
Oh, no. Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. So you run it up over top of the head?
Yeah, and you fold up the bill.
No. I didn't feel like looking like Ted Nugent out there, but yeah. No, I never did that. I mean, you can do whatever you want, like whatever makes you feel cool, I guess. Ultimately, yeah. Like whatever helps you just feel like you're really just getting out there doing
into the
things.
Environment and doing reconnaissance to the utmost degree.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. If you feel like
that's the most important thing,
the LARP is strong with you. If you got your boonie all tied up nicely, then go right ahead.
Yeah,
it's not going to affect it one way or the other. I don't really think, but ultimately, I usually just made sure my brim wasn't just like super huge because.
Yeah, because you don't want it to go in between the hammer and the
yeah, I don't want to have a misfire with my 1911 because I got my boonie hat caught in the. Yeah.
So boonie hats are solid. Just what about ghillie suits? What are your thoughts on ghillie suits with this?
They were good. I think that's like more of
kind of a specialty tool.
It's a specialty tool. Like I kept one pretty much. I mean, depending on the mission, but like we kept them like in our rucks.
You guys are probably doing like low pro ghillies, right? Like shoulder rig, shoulder head kind of stuff.
Yeah,
not like full ghillies.
I had a full ghillie, but
oh really?
But I didn't always break out the full ghillie. Like you could just throw on the top, and like I had a boonie hat that was ghillified as well, so it had like a little cape that like draped down over the back of my neck and stuff. But I think a ghillie suit comes into play more like if you're doing like when we were talking about, okay, you're building your serve site and you got like that sniper team, kind of keeping security for you, Overwatch, like those guys gillied up's probably not a bad idea. Because ultimately, if they have to start shooting and everyone else starts bounding back, they're going to be the last ones to leave.
Right.
So to kind of have their position somewhat concealed would be smart, I think. So
probably good for hasty OPs too, right? Or hasty serve sites.
Yeah, if you're doing surface serve sites, not a bad idea to have a ghillie suit on. Like just be chilling. Because then you don't really have to do that much. You're basically just kind of hanging out.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of like what in the movie Lone Survivors, kind of what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think they had ghillie suits on.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Like when they're hanging out. Remember when they're hanging out in the rocks?
Yep.
I think they're kind of ghillied up. They're just kind of chilling.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, there's the common misconception that ghillie suits are supposed to make you invisible. They're really not. It's just to kind of make you blend in and break up your outline. Your silhouette.
Yeah, it's just another form of camouflage is all.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks a little bit more natural than just like a camo pattern. You know, a camo pattern does a pretty good job, but ultimately the camo pattern is just... it's just breaking up your silhouette is all it's doing. Where a ghillie suit breaks up your silhouette, but it also looks like more like a natural, patch of grass or whatever you're trying to blend into.
Right.
So, but yeah, you're definitely not invisible.
So, but worth having, you think? Like worth?
I think so. I think
setting up at some point.
Oh, I think everyone should have them. Like, I don't think anyone should not have them. It's a good. You should always have different tools for different missions, So, if you have the capability of getting one that works good, go for it. I made mine, which I kind of suggest people make theirs because, there's some out there that you can buy that will work good for your environment, but ultimately you can look at like, okay, what kind of colors do I have in the area that I live, and try to actually make it work good in your area,
Mm-hmm.
So
cool. Any other gear considerations that
oh dude, I'm sure there's tons more that I'm not thinking of. Obviously radios, which we'll get into that more later. Maps, you're going to want maps of probably multiple locations, because depending on the area, how far you've moved, you're going to want to be able to move out of that area as well, like not just relying on a GPS, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're going to want to be able to move potentially in a long distance. So that's another part of that area reconnaissance, where it's like, okay, what areas do we want to focus in on, and like what do we want to get maps for these different areas, because we've realized that these are potentially like points of interest,
Yeah.
So
sweet.
I don't know. There's obviously a lot of other stuff, like just survival type stuff, like you want water filter or like some way to purify water, things like that.
Right.
Rain gear.
Cold weather gear if you're in a cold environment.
Yeah, because depending on how long you're out, like for us, we had teams like dedicated to go get water for us, so we could get re-outfitted. Like I remember when we got put into our serve site, usually like our hide site guys would like the water that they hustled in, like carried in, they would leave with us, and then they would go gather more water out of the hide site. Yeah,
gotcha.
So that way you had plenty of water in the serve site, and those guys aren't getting pulled. Or depending on how long the mission was planning on being, it's like, okay, these guys are going to have enough water amongst themselves, and we don't even have to gather anything. Everything we carried in we're going to be able to use for ourselves this time. But just take that into consideration, because it's like, once you get those guys in the ground, you can re-outfit them if you need to, like if it's an emergency, but it's like, at that point, you might as well just like get out of there. So don't shorten up your, I guess, recon efforts just because you weren't prepared. But yeah.
Cool. Well, just kind of in summary, and I just want to say really quick that this is like very, very
very vague.
intro. That we're keeping this kind of broad, kind of just making it just open discussion about kind of what this different, what it is in a nutshell. Talk about like some different kind of techniques and stuff, and kind of how you set up and take down and what you should have. This is such an in-depth topic. Like, we're probably gonna spearhead specific. We may set up like different situations that we would want to recon for, and kind of make like talk through little mock missions or something, or just break down like very detailed portions of like the reconnaissance mission, because I think it's very important for people to think in this vein, like from the being more prepared, from that kind of Minuteman mentality. Even just looking back at like the historical Minuteman, it wasn't just having your gear nearby ready to go. It was having, they would go out and actually fortify positions, and reconnaissance was a huge part of it. Like looking back at Paul Revere, he obviously rode his horseback and said the British are coming, like they had reconnaissance efforts in place to have early warning. And I think that's like, knowledge is power, so having all of this set up in a manner that you can get information back, utilizing the technology we have now, using radios, using, signaling techniques, using, being able to be right up on an objective and be hidden, but then still get information back to your community, I think is such a valuable skill to not only have, but to establish and maintain and work on,
Yeah.
And it's fun stuff to do, if you got a group of guys and you already go to the range a bunch, it's like start adding in some other things, You're not going to make it far if all you work on is your, 2-2, 4-2-2 drill on the range. Marksmanship and shooting, being able to shoot fast and, reload and do all that kind of stuff is highly important. And that's all like extremely basic, very, very, very basic marksmanship stuff. Like, that's just stuff you should be able to do. There's no excuses for it. But all these additional skills are things that...
Yeah, like there's so much that goes into just a reconnaissance mission, like everything from like your basic stuff, like, I keep hitting it, but land navigation and your radio stuff is so important. You got to be good at that stuff. Otherwise, you're just going to fail right out the gate.
Mm-hmm. You're just going to try to talk, and the enemy's going to hear you, and they're just going to come get you.
Yeah, so...
Yep.
And that's what makes it tough doing this podcast, because there's a lot of like... There's a lot of skills within this that you're going to have to know prior to even attempting to do this. Otherwise, you're missing such big pieces of the step that it's like, you're like, if it actually came time to actually do it for real, you would more than likely fail, just because you're not able to get to the position that you want to get to, because, you're not able to use a GPS or whatever. You have to use a map or just simple stuff,
Yeah.
Or you get, picked up on your radio and everyone's just listening to what you're saying,
or just mortaring your position because they see where you're talking from.
Yeah, but understanding the importance of reconnaissance is kind of more that we were trying to get out of this episode for sure. Like, why is it important for people to have these skills and start working on some of the stuff and building SOPs and within your group and within your community, because ultimately, like, if you have multiple groups of like prepared individuals within a community, and one group's better at the reconnaissance side than the other group, it's like, why wouldn't you use that group to go do recon for the community?
Right.
Because they're prepared. They've actually trained for that,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. If your group focuses more on something else, then it's like, okay, well, then you'll be ready for that when that comes around, So.
Yeah. So just kind of summarizing, the beginning basics of this, you've got your route reconnaissance, right? Which is dedicated to getting detailed information on different routes, where they're going, who's using them, how often they're used, if they're influenced by terrain, different things like
types
that.
of vehicles.
And then you've got area reconnaissance, which is like big picture, right?
Yeah.
So it's focusing more on like overall activity in the area, where, when, how, looking at like different terrain features like ridge lines, mountains, wooded areas.
Yeah, it's almost like the
If there's any
reconnaissance you're
air assets.
doing on an area that you don't know much about, pretty much.
And then you've got zone reconnaissance, which is it's a specific area of interest that you're trying to recon, correct?
Yeah.
So trying to figure out if there's routes coming in and out of there, what kind of boundaries might be around there. That's where like PIR comes in.
Yeah.
Where you have your priority intelligence requirements.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out like, and that's kind of, I think, when we were breaking down the serve site stuff, we were kind of like inadvertently referring to like a zone reconnaissance scenario where you're like looking at like a staging area or something like that.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, route reconnaissance can be done within your zone reconnaissance, or it can be done by a different group of people that are like, okay, it can all be done the same. Like your serve site can ultimately be looking at a route as well. Like, and that could be your only mission. It's like, okay, like let's say you're keeping an eye on, traffic coming in and out from like Cooper Landing area. Like if you're up in the mountains up there watching, because that's like our one road down to the Kenai Peninsula, you can sit there and be like, okay, these are the types of vehicles you're seeing. You could do that for just training as well. Like I'm seeing this trucking company come by once every day in the morning, or what, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the serve site can be used for, I wouldn't say for area reconnaissance as much, because it doesn't make much sense, because you're actually having to kind of like move around and see like the whole picture in order to do area reconnaissance. Whereas zone reconnaissance, it's like more like directed on a certain area, like
right.
That you can like, okay, I'm going to look at this spot from this area.
Sweet. And then, yeah, we talked about like different gear and stuff, just like very, very basic, like big picture stuff.
Yeah.
Which we're going to do multiple parts, of this. This is like part 1, and then we're going to have follow on parts as time goes on, and we'll probably break it up a little bit.
Yeah.
We might get into another one here pretty quick, but, yeah. And, I think ultimately, it's just good to start thinking outside the box now, start kind of getting immersed in some of this stuff, because it feeds into a lot of other things. Like it's not just tunnel vision and reconnaissance. Like this is very, like Steven was mentioning earlier, it's a lot of different skills that you got to get good at in order to be really effective in this area.
Yeah.
In this specific mission of reconnaissance. But I think it's a really good, like, prepared citizen perspective of like gathering intelligence, trying to stay low profile, undetected. Like just if you just look at the main like breakdown, you've got your serve site, hide site, and mission surveillance site. So from like a citizen's perspective, you can break it down even broader, where you've got your observation site, like your area where you're actually viewing the activity and recording the information.
Yeah.
And you're passing that back to kind of your support element. So the element that's receiving your information, whether that be like verbally, like paper airplane. No, not really, but
well, I mean, or you can just literally
radio.
This time at night, I'm sending a 2-man team from the hide site up to the serve site, and you just communicate like that way. Those guys don't have to get out.
Yeah.
They can stay there. They can communicate.
You just get within like, whispering range, like, which can be pretty far. Like at night you can whisper pretty far,
Yeah.
So, or, if you've got your radio stuff on lock and you're not going to get, or you're pretty certain you're not going to get picked up. You can keep your wattage down low enough to communicate low power over to like a hide site, and then you have directional comms. Yeah, so you've got your support / like information relay area.
Yeah.
And then you've got your main your main hub, which is where you're recording all that data and for safekeeping and for overall intelligence.
Yeah, and follow on missions afterwards.
Yep. It's all just it's proactive intelligence gathering is what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Yep. And it goes in. I feel like we're kind of all over the place, but that's because it's such a broad topic that it's like, man, there's so much into each little step that you have to know how to do. But ultimately, a lot of it just comes down to common sense. Like once you figure out, okay, this is a good method on how to do it, you can just by going out and trying it, you're going to learn stuff and you're going to figure out like that's going to work good or that's not going to work at all. We need to figure out a different way to do that. So,
yeah.
Just think, think in a way like, okay, what would, if I was actually against someone right now, like if I actually had someone who wanted to, kill us or whatever, what would they be trying to do like to counter this? So almost thinking that way, but it's hard to do.
Yeah. And as far as the kind of being all over the place, this is very like, we're just kind of starting to scratch at the surface. Just wanted to kind of start talking about it, getting the idea out there, breaking it down a little bit, not even breaking it down, just more just kind of having a conversation about reconnaissance as a whole. And then these follow-on parts that we're going to eventually do, we're going to really start to get into the weeds on it. And
yeah.
So if it's something you're interested in, if it's a topic you're interested in, keep an eye out for future episodes where, we'll make it simple. It'll be pretty clear that it's part 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, So, yeah, I think, again, basics, very basic level stuff. And it's going to start to get a little more detailed as we go. But just kind of wanted to jump into it. And we've got a lot of other topics we're working on that'll be it'll be set up the same way,
Yeah.
Like, it's just the way it has to be. But I think it's important to have like long form information available. So, yeah, it's been fun. I think as far as this episode's concerned, I think we've covered kind of the very, very beginnings of it, kind of broken down
just kind of piquing interest, I guess. And then we'll hit on it more. And then hopefully we've covered some of the more, we'll cover more of the fine skills, like as far as like radio communication, stuff like that, kind of break some of that stuff down too. So that way that's kind of in the back of your head for when we talk about stuff in the future, because that stuff has so much to do with how you structure how you're going to do, like how you structure the mission that you're planning on doing, knowing just some very basic stuff and some of the other areas that you need, even like moving different formations to move in and stuff like that, like how to move through, tight brush or through bigger fields and stuff like that, which we plan to cover. So, yeah.
Well, do you have anything else to add on, or you think we want to call today?
I think we're good I'm good with what we did.
Sweet.
Hopefully it wasn't just too all over the place. Like I said, I mean, we're definitely going to hit on this more and hopefully answer any questions that we leave you with. But this is obviously a topic that both of us like, so we'll definitely be diving into it more in depth later. So we will talk at you guys next time.